Are you someone that's annoyed with having been advised to take PPIs to address your acid reflux? And now you find yourself desperately seeking a solution to get off these PPIs that only mask the symptoms and do absolutely nothing to address the underlying root cause. Now, if you've been down this rabbit hole, then you know many of these drugs were designed in such a way to keep you on this hamster wheel so that you'd never get off these PPIs and you constantly derive perpetual revenue profits for these drug companies that only seek to sabotage your health and leave you with other debilitating health conditions so that you can only end up paying more money to them to facilitate their goals of higher profit objectives while leaving you feeling miserable and debilitated from other chronic health conditions. Now, if you feel this way, I felt the exact same way, and that is why I desperately wanted to get off these drugs and find myself living a way which was much more in tune with natural solutions. In this video, I'm going to share with you my journey getting off these PPIs, the mistakes I've made, as well as some of the things I wish I knew when I was trying to get off these drugs, because it was not easy at all. It was such a horrible experience trying to get off it. As always, please remember that none of what I'm going to share with you today is considered medical advice. This is for informational purposes only. I'm merely sharing my story in the hope that it can inspire you to look for more natural solutions. I was very hesitant about sharing this specific video or putting it up on YouTube because getting off PPIs is a very nuanced issue, and there is no real one-size-fits-all solution or approach to getting off these PPIs. I do believe it's vitally important to try and get off these drugs if you want to address the underlying root cause, but how you go about doing that, I don't think that's a one-size-fits-all solution. There are approaches and there are things that I've learned on this journey that can hopefully help to provide inspiration and may resonate with some of you. And it may not resonate with the rest of you, and for you, I hope you find a suitable solution to help you get through this. Any spark of inspiration that I can provide you to try and get to as natural alternative as possible, I'm deeply grateful for. Like I said, my goal with these videos is not to claim to have all these solutions, but rather to inspire you to move away from drugs that are only masking the symptoms and doing absolutely nothing to address the underlying root cause. And the sad part about this is oftentimes these drugs are not just masking the underlying problem, they're leaving you with a lot of other health conditions that could be so far worse than what you're currently going through. And that is the part that really truly saddens me and leaves me feeling so sad and so miserable about the fact that as a society we even tolerating this. We even tolerating these drugs that are leaving us in such debilitating conditions. Now, my goal with this is to inspire more natural solutions, to inspire more people to move towards natural-based solutions that address the underlying root cause and bring about a more healthier and vibrant society so that we start to make more conscious decisions when it relates to things that are in our own interest as well as the interest of society as a whole. Now, when I reflect upon my own situation and what I've been through, going through all the side effects of these drugs, as well as observing what my mom has gone through and what some of my family members and others have gone through from the side effects of a lot of the drugs that they are taking, it just leaves me with so much of anger and resentment towards the industry that is perpetrating these crimes. And the fact that they have done so much to stifle these natural solutions. And when I look at it and I really think about it and I reflect on the lives of my grandparents or even your great-grandparents, a lot of these chronic conditions weren't even around back then. None of them have even knew about such debilitating chronic conditions. Most of them generally tend to have lived better lives, but it's such an accelerated pace recently of people getting more and more chronic conditions that if one can just observe what is taking place, it's almost like we find ourselves as that frog in the boiling water scenario where our health is being sabotaged from us. And you're seeing more and more people developing a lot of these chronic conditions. I remember when I first had this condition, my family members didn't even know what this chronic acid reflux was all about. And we didn't even know about this whole notion of gluten-free, and it wasn't a thing. If you asked for gluten-free products, you wouldn't even get it at a store. You often had to make it yourself. And today, if you look at society, so many places that you go to are catering for gluten-free, which means that these chronic conditions are becoming a bigger part of society. And a lot of it is due to these drugs causing all these debilitating side effects. And we need to come back to a situation where we can address the underlying problem and solve these through natural solutions rather than feeding these profit drivers and becoming a victim of their madness and their intent. So, as I mentioned, in terms of this video itself, I don't claim to have all the solutions. In fact, far from that. I'm going to share with you my experience in the hope that it helps to provide some context in terms of what I went through trying to get off these PPIs. So with that, let's get right into my story, and then I'll take you through some of the things I wish I knew back then when I first tried to get off PPIs, as well as things that I think can make a difference and that you can potentially incorporate in your approach, whatever it is, whatever approach you decide to take to try and get off these PPIs and get back to a diet that is much more conducive to your health and wellness. I hear a lot of people say, well, I just want to get off these PPIs, solve my acid reflux so that I can go back to eating a SAD diet or standard American diet. And I don't think that should be the intent behind this. It's not to go back to eating the foods and going back to the lifestyle and the behaviors that contributed to a lot of these health issues in the first place. The important here is to get back into a new way of living that won't recreate those same scenarios or leave you with other health conditions. Because once you go down this rabbit hole and you start learning a lot about the foods and the way in which processed foods are created, you start to understand how they leave us with these debilitating health conditions. So without further ado, let's get into my story. So in terms of my story, I did share a lot of this as part of my first video, which talks about my journey with acid reflux, and I go into a lot more detail in terms of the entirety of my journey. In this specific video, I want to focus on the part of my journey where I was trying to wean off this, because I left out potentially a lot of parts that relate to the weaning off of PPIs as part of that video. And so in this video, I'm focusing specifically on my journey weaning off these PPIs. Like I mentioned, I was probably around 10 years plus on these PPIs. And while I was on these PPIs, I had multiple different attempts of trying to get off these PPIs. And that was not easy. Every time I tried to get off these PPIs, the acid reflux would come gushing back. Anything, absolutely anything that I would have eaten would have caused an acid reflux reaction. The one thing that I did try and do initially trying to get off these PPIs was trying fasting. I used to fast for maybe half the day up until 12 p.m. And when 12 p.m. came, then I would take the PPIs. When I was fasting, I never really got much of the acid reflux symptoms. But as soon as I started eating, the acid reflux would just come back. So that wasn't really a viable solution in terms of helping me get off PPIs. In fact, I think it potentially even made things worse during some periods of time. I understand now why there were certain foods that I was consuming when I was breaking my fast that potentially contributed to it. So I'm not saying fasting doesn't work at all. It may work for you. But for me, in terms of my experience with it at that time, it didn't really do much in terms of helping me get off these PPIs completely. Now, the other thing I also done when I was on these PPIs is I tried using supplements and things to help me while I was not taking PPIs. So gravitating to less aggressive medications, so think about Gaviscon and things like that. But those only end up doing the same, right? They just mask the symptoms and they don't solve the underlying root cause. And I thought about it from the perspective of maybe if I can use this as a means to getting off that period. And I tried that, and maybe I would have got up until 2 or 3 days without the PPIs, but it wasn't really doing much in terms of getting rid of the underlying acid reflux. And each time I had tried so many different times with so many different supplements. I tried the Siberian pine nut oil the days when I wasn't taking, but even that in itself started giving me acid reflux, so that didn't work. I tried not taking the PPIs or reducing the dosages, but that also didn't really move the needle much in terms of helping me get off these PPIs completely. I tried the weaning off approach of trying to slowly reduce the dosages, and ultimately what I realized is every time I would try and get off it, whatever I would eat, even if it was a carrot, for example, would give me acid reflux. And that was during the weaning off period. So if I tried to get off the PPI and then introduce a food, it would just cause acid reflux. And the weaning off approach wasn't really working for me. It wasn't really moving the needle. Ultimately, I tried adapting the diet. I was told, well, if I eliminate certain foods, or based on what I was reading, it said, well, if you eliminate gluten and you eliminate things with a lot of yeast, you should be able to reduce the dosage of these PPIs. And that seemed to make some difference. So that was my first initial signs of I need to go down this diet rabbit hole and understand what are these foods that are contributing to my acid reflux. And I started eliminating a lot more of these foods. And these weren't the conventional foods you're told to stay away from. I already was doing that, staying away from the very spicy foods, staying away from things that are very tomato-based, acidic types foods. These were looking beyond that. A lot of what I shared in my video about the top 7 foods that you absolutely must avoid, those go into these types of foods. And that's when I started to venture down the path of trying to eliminate a lot of these foods. So think about the gluten and all those aspects. So once I started to eliminate the gluten, I was able to reduce my dosage of PPIs. There were times when I was on this PPI hamster wheel where I was taking up to 40 milligrams a day in order to manage my acid reflux symptoms. And I slowly started to get that down. And through adapting my diet, I reached a stage where I was getting down to 10 milligrams of the PPIs. And the 10 milligrams was being managed on a very restrictive diet, so not eating gluten. But as soon as I would leave the PPI, the acid reflux would come back. Like I said, anything would then end up triggering the acid reflux. So getting off these PPIs was extremely challenging. But what I started to notice and learn along this journey is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Being able to reduce it was very helpful, because that started to help me understand the dietary aspect of it. But as soon as you leave it, you're changing the normal digestive process. So from the background understanding of PPIs is they try and eliminate the acid. So as soon as you take them away, the acid starts to come up your esophagus. Your body's gotten so used to it. You've created this environment that's very conducive to a lot of these bad bacteria and pathogens that live within your stomach and digestive system. And by taking these away, and now you're changing up this environment, your digestive system, you haven't done anything to heal your digestive system. You haven't done anything to really move you forward on that. So a lot of it comes back down to saying, okay, what do I do now to try and heal the digestive system? What can I do to start to change up my diet, change up things? And if you're going to get off PPIs, you need some supportive elements, so be it the diet, be it nutrition, all these other different practices to help you get through it. But my approach was, I was getting so frustrated with this weaning off approach, because each time I would try and get off it, the acid reflux would come back, and it just wasn't working for me. And I know, and I do recognize that there are a lot of people that weaning off works fantastic for them. And like I said, it probably is the best approach to get off these PPIs, is to try and wean off. Now, for myself personally, it didn't work for me. I had to then I got so frustrated of keep on having to gravitate back to these PPIs that I reached a stage of complete utter frustration. I'm like, damn it, it's been taking me 10 years. I've been constantly trying to wean off these drugs. And each time I try and get off it, the acid reflux would just come back. And I was afraid about the damage that it was causing to my esophagus and my gastro lining because of the acid reflux symptoms that I was experiencing. So I never ended up getting off these PPIs during those multiple different attempts. So ultimately, I reached the stage where I need to delve down the rabbit hole. I need to understand this condition better. I started researching quite a lot. I went deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole to understand how to get off these PPIs. But eventually I reached a stage of complete frustration. I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm tossing all these PPIs out. I'm getting off this drug because all the side effects from having taken these PPIs had started to catch up with me. I was getting poor nutrient absorption. I was starting to feel like shit every day. I wasn't able to have the energy levels. I was just getting so miserable from all these side effects having caught up to me that I reached a stage where I was like, fuck it, I'm getting off these drugs and I need to find a natural solution to it. My approach was cold turkey at that stage. After having those multiple different attempts, I left these PPIs completely and I went to taking things like cabbage juice. And the initial few days I was getting acid reflux symptoms, but I was determined at this stage. I was like, fuck it, I've got to get off these drugs. I need to adapt something. So I was eating very bland food, probably not the right foods. I was still steaming things like rice and grains and still consuming a little bit of it, even fasting for a lot of times, trying to stretch out my fasting duration so that I didn't experience as much acid reflux. And if the acid reflux was very bad, I would just resort to things that were more natural, like bicarb soda, taking things to just stifle the acid reflux. And my goal here was I need to make it at least 30 days without it so I can get my body used to not having to deal with PPIs and it can form a new habit of getting off these PPIs and trying to find dietary solutions to help me manage these symptoms. But it was nasty. It was a nasty period. I think it was probably one of the periods that was most challenging in my life to have gotten off this drug because of the addictive tendency that this drug tends to have. But because I took this approach of tossing it all out and saying, this is it, I'm not going back, I need to start healing these underlying conditions, as well as addressing my digestive system and all the side effects that this drug was having on me. So ultimately I got to the stage of getting off these PPIs by introducing things like cabbage juice, doing a lot of juicing, trying to keep certain foods in as raw form as possible, so eating a lot of greens, but I wasn't doing a lot of what I know right now. So I'm going to get into that part. So I think you have the background in terms of how I ultimately got off these PPIs. But there was a lot of things when it comes to diet that I shared in my other videos, the herbs that help, the celery juicing. I never knew about celery juicing back then and how effective that could be as a way in which to address the acid reflux symptoms. So incorporating a lot of those elements would have made my journey getting off these PPIs so much more easier. Not consuming grains, not consuming these bland foods that I was consuming at the time would have made my journey even better, even way more easier in terms of the transition period. So that's a lot of what I do want to share in this video. So there you go, you have my story in terms of my personal experience getting off these PPIs. In this next part, I'm going to share with you the mistakes that I wish I didn't make, some of the things I wish I incorporated to hopefully help you make your transition to PPI. So maybe you get those few nuggets from what I am going to say that you can potentially incorporate, whatever your approach is. Like I said, I don't have all the solutions. I'm sharing with you my story in the hope that it can inspire you and you can take away the learnings that I've gone through along this journey trying to get off these PPIs. And hopefully that can help make a difference in your life and leave you feeling better, because ultimately you want to find yourself getting to a natural solution where you're addressing the root cause and not just masking symptoms. So let's get into the next part of this video. Alright, so in this part of the video, I'm going to share with you the potential approaches that I would have taken had I known what I know now in terms of this condition, and if I were to get off PPIs, hopefully never have to face that situation again. But things I would have been better off incorporating had I known about these way back then, because it would make my weaning off PPIs so much more easier had I incorporated a lot of these strategies. Now, I'm not saying this is going to work for everyone. This is just based on my personal experience and what I think could have made my journey weaning off these PPIs so much more easier and so much more better. And hopefully, if some of what I say resonates with you, try and take away these positive aspects and see if you can incorporate them in your practice. Like I said, I don't have all the solutions to weaning off PPIs. There's so many different approaches. Some people prefer cold turkey and it will work well for them. Others will prefer weaning off and it will work well for you. In this video, I'm gonna try and provide you with solutions to both approaches. The one that I think is probably the easier approach is the weaning off approach, and that's going to the weaning off approach. In terms of weaning off PPIs, I think it's easier if you break it down into smaller and smaller dosages. So if you're moving from 40 milligrams, try and get down to 20 milligrams, and then 10 milligrams, 5 milligrams until you can get off it, and then skip some days. So not taking it for 2-3 days, taking it again when those symptoms come up, and then until you are able to completely eradicate it. But that approach of weaning off, I think, needs to be taken while you making all these other changes, while you have incorporated a better diet, a better lifestyle that's more conducive to not giving rise to these acid reflux symptoms. So have a look at some of those other videos where I shared with you the foods that you should not be consuming. Now, in terms of the cold turkey approach, you definitely want to go very aggressive on restricting your diet from having any foods that can contribute to acid reflux symptoms. Whereas with the weaning off period, it's going to be easier for people that are still addicted to certain types of foods, and you find it very difficult to let go of certain foods, and you need to consume those foods to have some sort of sense of normalcy. So for people who are going through the weaning off approach and still wanting to maintain certain aspects of their diet that may not be in complete alignment with the type of diet that would not result in any acid reflux reactions, that approach is going to work the best in order to get off these PPIs in a more slower paced and more probably easier way to get off it without having to radically change your life. Now, in terms of the cold turkey approach, like I mentioned, you want to go very aggressive with shifting your diet. This is the approach, I think if I would do it differently, I would incorporate a lot of the practices that I shared in my earlier videos, a lot of these supplements, making sure that I consume celery juice the first thing in the morning, and try and have and build up or increase the dosages of celery juice, because you're using this to try and facilitate your digestion, strengthen your digestive system. So trying to have that absolutely pure celery juice. I made a video on my celery juicing journey. So bringing in, I think especially during the early days of the getting off PPIs, cold turkey, you want to not consume any foods. In fact, if you can go on a liquid only, if I could have gone on a liquid only diet, it would have made so much of difference, because you're not really activating the digestive system when you're going on a juice fast. So if you're doing like 30 days of juice fasting, while you're getting off these, or while you've gone off these PPIs completely, it's probably going to make a huge difference in not experiencing acid reflux symptoms. So going on a lot of green juices, I'm not talking about the acidic juices, probably want to avoid things like citrus fruits that are going to potentially aggravate this. You want to stick to things that are green, alkalizing in nature, and that are just going to help alleviate a lot of these symptoms. So think about those green juices. I've seen people go on these green juice diets for almost 30 days plus, and I think that can potentially make a huge difference, because if you're going on consuming more juices, it's going to alkalize your system. Like I mentioned in my previous videos, there are foods that digest and they leave behind an acidic ash, and you have foods that digest and leave behind an alkaline ash. You want to aim for more and more alkaline forming foods. So if you go on a juicing diet, you're not activating the digestive system. That can potentially help to eliminate a lot of the acid reflux symptoms during that initial phase when everything is just causing an acid reflux symptoms. The less solid foods, the less opportunities you're going to allow it to create that acid reflux symptoms, the better. And to start incorporating the things like the celery juice. And then when you have the acid reflux symptoms, rather than resorting to a PPI, go for things like that are more natural. Maybe if you have to gravitate to things like Gaviscon, maybe as a temporary measure to try and stifle the acid reflux symptoms, or go on to other more natural solutions. But during that weaning off period, I think it's probably better to resort to tum-tums and things like that, or bicarb soda, to try and just stifle that immediate acid reflux reaction, if you do get them, rather than going to PPIs, which are very addictive. But hopefully with the juices alone, it shouldn't be as aggressive as what it was, and hopefully over time you start to experience less and less acid reflux, and you can slowly then start to incorporate more solid foods. So when you're incorporating solid foods, it's like breaking a fast. And if you watch my 60 days of juicing video, that will give you a bit of context in terms of the things you should do when you're breaking a fast. And to make sure that when you're breaking the fast, you're first incorporating things that are easy to digest. Think about things that are also going to be more alkalizing. You don't want to supply your body with things that are going to aggravate your acid reflux symptoms at this stage. Think about salads, a lot of green salads, a lot of fruit that are not very acidic in nature, to try and slowly start to incorporate solid foods, and then slowly build yourself up to consuming other types of foods without using anything that is drug related. So you're not going back to PPIs, you're using a lot of these natural supplements, the digestive bitters, digestive enzymes, to try and support your weaning off the PPI. So digestive enzymes, digestive bitters before each meal can help to make quite a lot of the difference when you start incorporating a lot of these foods. But like I said, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to everyone. You've got to really work and see what's going to work for you, because I don't believe there is a one-size-fits-all solution. You got to see what's resonating with you, and if it is resonating with you, then you try and incorporate a lot of these. So hopefully that helps to shed some light in terms of how you can go about weaning off these PPIs. Like I said, it's not an easy journey, and I hope you found some sort of value out of this video. And if you did, I invite you to subscribe to my channel and join me on this journey navigating mind, body, and soul wellness. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.